Okay, so this is the Bible study for 2 Samuel chapter 14, verse 24 through chapter 15, verse 12. And the text says, "But the king said, he must go to his own house. He must not see my face. So Absalom went to his own house and did not see the face of the king. In all Israel, there was not a man so highly praised for his handsome appearance as Absalom. From the top of his head to the sole of his foot, there was no blemish on him. Whenever he cut the hair of his head, he used to cut it once a year because it became too heavy for him. He would weigh it, and its weight was 200 shekels by the royal standard. 3 sons and a daughter were born to Absalom. His daughter's name was Tamar, and she became a beautiful woman. Absalom lived 2 years in Jerusalem without seeing the king's face. Then Absalom sent for Joab in order to send him to the king, but Joab refused to come to him. So he sent a second time, but he refused to come. Then he said to his servants, "Look, Joab's field is next to mine, and he has barley there. Go and set it on fire." So Absalom's servants set the field on fire. Then Joab did go to Absalom's house, and he said to him, "Why have your servants set my field on fire?" Absalom said to Joab, "Look, I sent word to you and said, 'Come here so I can send you to the king to ask, why have I come from Geshur? It would be better for me if I was still there. Now then, I want to see the king's face, and if I'm guilty of anything, let me be put to death.'" So Joab went to the king and told him this. Then the king summoned Absalom, and he came in and bowed down with his face to the ground before the king, and the king kissed him. In the course of time, Absalom provided himself with a chariot and horses and with 50 men to run ahead of him. He would get up early and stand by the side of the road leading to the city gate. Whenever anyone came with a complaint to be placed before the king for a decision, Absalom would call to him, "What town are you from?" He would answer, "Your servant is from one of the tribes of Israel." Then Absalom would say to him, "Look, your claims are valid and proper, but there is no representative of the king to hear you." And Absalom would add, "If only I were appointed judge in the land. Then everyone who has a complaint or case could come to me, and I would see that they receive justice." Also, whenever anyone approached him to bow down before him, Absalom would reach out his hand and take hold of him and kiss him. Absalom behaved in this way toward all the Israelites who came to the king asking for justice, and so he stole the hearts of the people of Israel. At the end of 4 years, Absalom said to the king, "Let me go to Hebron and fulfill a vow I made to the Lord. While your servant was living in Geshur in Aram, I made this vow. If the Lord takes me back to Jerusalem, I will worship the Lord in Hebron." The king said to him, "Go in peace." So he went to Hebron. Then Absalom sent secret messengers throughout the tribe of Israel to say, "As soon as you hear the sound of trumpets, then say, 'Absalom is king in Hebron.'" 200 men from Jerusalem had accompanied Absalom. They had been invited as guests and went quite innocently, knowing nothing about this matter. While Absalom was offering sacrifices, he also sent for Ahithophel the Gilonite, David's counselor, to come from Gilo, his hometown. And so the conspiracy gained strength, and Absalom's following kept on increasing. Okay, so remember that you can download PDF copies of this Bible study at www.abqnaz.org/alive so that you can follow along with us as we study this text. And number 1 on our study says, what happened in our text last week in 2 Samuel 14, 1 through 23? A, Joab played a trick on David. Yes, he did. B, Joab sent a woman to David with a story similar to the way the prophet Nathan spoke to David. That's also true. C, Joab convinced David to bring Absalom back to Israel. Yes. And honestly, that's important because we really stopped right in the middle of a thought, and Absalom came back to Israel. But there were restrictions when he came back to Israel, and that's what we learned right at the beginning of this text. So number 2 says, what do we learn now in 14? Now it says 14:14, but that's not in our text for today. That should be 14:24. So what we learn today in 14:24 is but the king said he must go to his own house, he must not see my face. So that was the restriction that was placed on Absalom. He could come back to Jerusalem, but he couldn't be in the presence of the king. He was not given audience with the king, and that was a big deal, especially for a king's son. But that limited his own authority and his own. So he, in other words, he was allowed to be back in Jerusalem and wasn't in exile, but he wasn't really a part of the king's court or a part of the king's family. He wasn't even allowed to see King David. Number 3 says, what do we learn about Absalom in 14:25 through 27? A, in all Israel, there was not a man so highly praised for his handsome appearance as Absalom. This is how I know that I'm not in danger of becoming like Absalom, because this is not, God has not blessed me in this way. B, there was no blemish on him. That's true. C, he had a lot of hair, beautiful hair, which is also a way that I'm nothing like Absalom. And he cut it once a year because it was too heavy. There may be some foreshadowing here. So if you know this story and you know what happens, his hair plays a prominent role in the story as we go forward. So there's some foreshadowing here. It's not just another part of the description of how wonderfully handsome he was, but also it was the the tool of his demise, really. D, he weighed his hair, it should be his hair, and it weighed 200 shekels, about 5 pounds. So when he cut his hair once a year, the amount that he cut off was 5 pounds worth. So he grew thick and beautiful hair. I don't have that problem. If I cut my hair once a year, I think I could get a gram's worth. E, 3 sons and daughters were born to Absalom. His daughter's name was Tamar, and she became a beautiful woman. So he named his daughter after his sister, who had been disgraced. And his daughter, in keeping with and in following his family and his sister, she also became very beautiful. And so it seems like this was just a handsome group of people here, and a pretty family, and they were blessed in that way, although in some ways that blessing seems to have become a curse for their family. Number 4, what happened in 14:28 through 31? Absalom lived 2 years in Jerusalem without seeing the king's face, and that's true. So this is how long he put up with, it seems, being in this situation and circumstance. B, Absalom sent for Joab in order to send him to the king, but Joab refused to come to him. That's true. And C, Joab refused to come a second time too. So Joab was the reason Absalom was here. We don't know why Joab didn't go. Maybe he didn't want to go. He knew what was going to be asked, and he didn't want to go to the king on Absalom's behalf. He had already stuck his neck out for Absalom a little bit, and maybe he wasn't ready to do that again. Absalom sent his servants to set Joab's barley field on fire. That got his attention. So it says, now he did come. So that's what we hear. The second part of this question says, what message did Absalom send to the king? He sent a message, why am I even here? Why couldn't I say? Now, I don't know if we talked about this. I don't remember that we talked about this in the last text, in the last Bible study, but Geshur was where Absalom's mother's family was from. So he was the son of the daughter, so the grandson of the king of Geshur. So David's wife, who bore Absalom and Tamar, was the daughter of the king of Geshur. So he was the grandson of the king in Geshur, but he came back to Jerusalem. Now he's the son of the king, but he can't even see the king's face. So why is he even here? That's his answer. That's his question. And then he says, let me see the king, and if I'm guilty of anything, then put me to death. In other words, this if I'm really good, what this in between thing is no good. Either I'm innocent because I was avenging what was done to my sister, and that may have been according to the law, or I'm guilty and you should put me to death. But don't leave me hanging here in this in between where I don't even get a chance to declare my innocence and I can't see the king. And apparently this convinced the king. So number 5 says, what happened next according to 1433? A, David summoned Absalom. Yes. B, David kissed his son. Yes. C, happily ever after, the end. And I would say A and B are true, but I think we're going to stop short of C. It seemed very nice. It seemed like a very nice thing. But in the end, what we see of Absalom's character suggests that maybe he didn't just want a happy family reunion, but he was actually working on gaining authority and following among the people. And part of that was he needed to be able to stand in the presence of the king and have that standing in the king's family. And it seems like Absalom is angling here. Obviously, by the time we finish this text, it's very obvious. Number 6, what do we learn in 15:1-6? A, Absalom seemed to be gaining influence. B, every day Absalom went to stand by the road leading to the city. Now, he worked hard to gain that influence. I would argue that if it wasn't so undermining to the authority of David, that these are the sorts of things we should do in when we're let me just say this. Absalom is a bad example. So don't follow Absalom, because Absalom was trying to gain influence for his own ends, for his own usurping of the king's authority and becoming king himself. That's no good. But he knew how to do it. He knew how to get people on his side. So we shouldn't want to undermine authority, and we shouldn't want to get people on our side so that we can go against someone else. But on the other hand, I think about this in terms of pastors. You know, a staff member should not undermine a pastor's authority and go and say, yeah, pastor's not that good. Pastor's, pastor doesn't care for you very well. If I was the pastor, if only I had more authority, then I would do better. I would care for you much better. We shouldn't do that. On the other hand, that pastors that what Absalom was doing was one of the ways that we can build relationship with our people and let our people know that they are cared for, is by going to them and caring for them and making sure that they have the care that they need. And a pastor can have a very loyal following and a very loyal group of people in his church or her church, if we do that, if we care for them that way. And I admire, let me just say it this way, I admire the work that Absalom went to care for the people of Israel. I just wish he didn't do it for his own gain. I just wish he didn't do it so that he could undermine his father. And so I don't think the moral of the story is do what Absalom did by any means. On the other hand, Absalom is wise. Absalom is crafty. He sees what needs to be done. And unfortunately, I think a lot of times We don't do what needs to be done to we want people to like us in our job, even if it's outside of the church and in ministry. In our job, we want people to like us, but we want them to like us without us doing anything over and above what's required. I think it is also scriptural to say that we should use whatever influence we have or whatever we have to gain influence, and God will use that. And so yeah. D, Absalom would say, look, your claims are valid and proper, but there is no representative of the king to come uh, to hear you. If only I were appointed judge in the land, then everyone who has a complaint or case could come to me, and I would see that they receive justice. So this is where Absalom is elevating himself and tearing down the king, because if only the king, and I've seen this, by the way, happen in churches. I've seen this happen in businesses where somebody worked very hard and gained influence, but also they used this influence to tear down their leader. And this is really one of the best books that I think has been written, is called A Tale of Three Kings. I think I have some copies in my office in the Valley, and I've recommended this to people because it compares Saul and David and Absalom. And I think I recommended this at one point when we were still talking about Saul. Now we're coming down to Absalom, and it compares the way these three kings handled their authority and their leadership. Very, very good. Obviously, Saul and Absalom are negative examples for a lot of reasons, and comparing that with what David did with regard to the king that was in power, regardless of how much wrong he did, David did not behave like Absalom. And David is generally a good king, and yet Absalom is doing this. Absalom would bow down and reach out and grab and embrace these people and kiss them. So he was very, not only handsome and with great hair, but also very relational and connectional. And he found ways to really build connection with the people and win them over. And it says he stole the hearts of the people of Israel. It says in this way he stole the hearts of the people of Israel, and all of that's true. Number 7, what do you think about what Absalom is doing? I think I need to hear the rest of the story before I answer. Maybe you do. B, I think it's great. He treats people well and gains their favor. We should all do this. Yeah, I actually think we should, except for not at the expense of tearing down our leader, not so that we should gain influence for the good of the people and to support our leader. But we should not gain influence to undermine our leader that God has placed in authority above us. C, it would be better if he didn't criticize the king's leadership while he was doing it. Perhaps he could have went to the king and offered to help instead of trying to manipulate the people against the king. So what would have happened if Absalom, in doing this to gain favor with the people so that he could undermine and tear down the king, what if instead of doing that, he went to the king and said, look, let me help you gain the heart, the favor of the people. Let me go out and be the judge. Let me do these things to win over the people, but I'm going to, in doing so, support you. And so because they love me, they're going to love you. And he could have actually done that and increased the favor of King David with the people, and still probably ended up becoming king after King David without having to take it right now. And so that was what should have been done or could have been done, to use what he was doing and maybe what seems like his natural gifts in a way that would support his leader and his father, and and use it in a positive way. But that's not what he did. Number 8, what happened in 15:7 through 12? After 4 years, Absalom asked to fulfill a vow made to God and go to Hebron to worship. So this was the place where David was, remember, for some time in exile. And David was king in Hebron at one time. And so now he's going to go to Hebron and worship. And Absalom sent messages to Israel telling them to declare him king in Hebron. So, hey, when I'm there, when I'm worshiping, then you guys all say Absalom's now king and he's king over in Hebron. So this was a place where David had been king before he came to Jerusalem. So it seems like this would be another place where he could be king. And so he's setting up a shadow kingdom. He's setting up an alternate court and king, and going to rule from there instead, rather than directly taking David out. Absalom had some of David's men, some of them not knowing what was happening. So he took 200 men from Jerusalem with him. And now they're here and everybody's saying, oh, now Absalom's king. And it looks to everybody else like Absalom's got these 200 men that were loyal to David that now are no longer loyal to David and they're loyal to Absalom. But most of these guys didn't even know what was happening. So they went with him because he was the king's son, not because they were going to be a part of this coup. Number 9 says, how long do you think Absalom had been planning this? Man, I don't know, but my guess would be ever since he came back. My guess would be maybe this was part of the vow he actually did make while he was still in Geshur, that all of this, that he was stewing and angry about what had happened to him, how he had been banished, what had been done to his sister, and maybe he's even holding the king responsible. And then he gets banished and the king doesn't even bring him back. And maybe all along he's stewing and holding this against the king, to the point where when he's back, this doesn't fix it. But I think this was all a plan. I think it was a plan the whole time, because he's been quietly angry at all the people that have wronged him, so that he feels justified in doing it when he comes back. Let me just say that I don't know about you, but I've felt this way at times on smaller scales. Um, and I know how this sort of thinking can infect you. I know how dangerous it is, to be distant from people that you should be close to, and what thoughts the enemy can put in your mind during that time, and how easy it is to allow the enemy to convince you of these things, and then you begin devising up a plan and gaining influence for your own gain, because you see yourself as an enemy of somebody who should have been your ally, should have been perhaps even your leader. And the second part says, have you ever undermined your leaders and done some of the things that Absalom did? And my guess is we haven't taken over any kingdoms, but maybe we haven't plotted and planned and done anything at this level. But my guess, I can think back in high school where I wasn't named a leader and I thought I should have been a leader. And I started showing that leader up every chance I got and showing them why I should have been chosen. I can think of times when I've done just this sort of thing. And that was when I was young and foolish, but ultimately letting my fleshly desires guide what guide my actions. And I say that because I'm saying, I'm not sure I would have matured out of that. I came out of that because I was taught what God would have for my life instead. And so instead of following my fleshly inclinations, my selfish desires for power and authority, like I used to, I learned to do what God says. and treat authority and leaders the way God told me to. And so I behave differently now, but I don't think I would have just matured out of that. I believe that I would still be doing the same thing if God hadn't spoke to me from his word, from this text actually, um, about how I'm supposed to respond to authority and the leaders that God has placed in my life. And so I want to just encourage you that whatever you might have done in the past, that God is calling us to respond differently and treat our leaders as those that God has placed in authority over us, and behave differently, behave more like David did under Saul than like Absalom did under David. But I can tell you that without God changing us, that our tendency will be to behave exactly like Absalom. And so let's be different.